I, Alexander Manette, write this melancholy paper in my doleful cell in the Bastille, during the last month of the year 1767. I write it at stolen intervals, under every difficulty. Some pitying hand may find it there, when I and my sorrows are dust. Hope has quite departed from my breast. I know from terrible warnings I have noted in myself that my reason will not long remain unimpaired. But I solemnly declare that I am at this time in the possession of my right mind, that my memory is exact and circumstantial, and that I write the truth, as I shall answer for these my last recorded words. One cloudy, moonlit night, in the 3rd week of December, I think the 22nd of the month, in the year 1757, I was walking in a retired part of the quay by the scene for the refreshment of the frosty air, when a carriage came along behind me, driven very fast. As I stood aside to let that carriage pass, a head was put out at the window, and a voice called to the driver to stop. The carriage stopped as soon as the driver could rein in his horses. The same voice called to me by my name. I answered. The carriage was then so far in advance of me that 2 gentlemen had time to open the door and alight before I came up with it. I observed that they were both wrapped in cloaks, and appeared to conceal themselves, as they stood side by side near the carriage door. "You are Dr. Manette," said one. "I am." "Dr. Manette, formerly of Beauvais," said the other, the young physician, originally an expert surgeon, who within the last year or two has made a rising reputation in Paris. "Gentlemen," I returned, "I am that Dr. Manette of whom you speak so graciously." "We have been to your residence," said the first, "and not being so fortunate as to find you there, and being informed that you are probably walking in this direction, we followed in the hope of overtaking you. Will you please to enter the carriage?" The manner of both was so imperious, as they both moved, as these words were spoken, so as to place me between themselves and the carriage door. They were armed, I was not. "Gentlemen," said I, "pardon me, but I usually inquire who does me the honor to seek my assistance, and what is the nature of the case to which I am summoned." The reply to this was made by him who had spoken second. "Doctor, your clients are people of condition. As to the nature of the case, your confidence in your skill assures us that you will ascertain it for yourself better than we can describe it. Enough. Will you please to enter the carriage?" I could do nothing but comply, and I entered in silence. They both entered after me, the last springing in after putting up the steps. The carriage turned about and drove on at its former speed. I repeat this conversation exactly as it has occurred. I have no doubt that it is, word for word, the same. I describe everything exactly as it took place, constraining my mind not to wander from the task. Where I make the broken marks that follow here, I leave off for the time and put my paper in its hiding place. The carriage left the streets behind, passed the north barrier, and emerged upon the country road. At 2/3 of a league from the barrier, I did not estimate the distance at that time, but afterwards, when I traversed it, struck out of the main avenue, and presently stopped at a solitary house. We all 3 alighted and walked by a damp, soft footpath in the garden, where a neglected fountain had overflowed, to the door of the house. It was not opened immediately in answer to the ringing of the bell, and no one of my 2 conductors struck the man who opened it with his heavy riding glove. There was nothing in this action to attract my particular attention, for I see common people strike more commonly than dogs, but the other 2, being angry likewise, struck the man in like manner with his arm. The look and bearing of the brothers were then so exactly alike that I then perceived them to be twin brothers. I had heard cries proceeding from an upper chamber. I was conducted to this chamber straight, the cries growing louder as we ascended the stairs, and I found a patient in a high fever of the brain lying on a bed. I saw this within the first minute of my contemplation of the patient, for, in her restless strivings, she had turned over on her face on the edge of the bed, had drawn the end of the scarf into her mouth, and was in danger of suffocation. My first act was to put out my hand to relieve her breathing, and in moving the scarf aside, the embroidery in the corner caught my sight. I turned her gently over, placed my hand upon her breast to calm her and keep her down, and looked into her face. Her eyes were dilated and wide, and she constantly uttered piercing shrieks and repeated the words, "My husband, my father, and my brother," and then counted up to 12 and said, "Hush," for an instant, and no more. She would pause to listen, then the piercing shrieks would begin again. She would repeat the cry, "My husband, my father, and my brother," and would count up to 12 and say, "Hush." There was no variation in the order or the manner. There was no cessation, but the regular moment's pause in the utterance of these sounds. "How long," I asked, "has this lasted?" It was the elder who replied, "Since about this hour last night." "She has a husband, a father, and a brother?" "A brother." "I do not address her brother?" He answered with great contempt, "No." "She has some recent association with the number 12. The younger brother impatiently rejoined, "With 12 o'clock." "See, gentlemen," said I, still keeping my hands upon her breast, "how useless I am, as you have brought me. If I had known what I was coming to see, I could have come provided. As it is, time must be lost. There are no medicines to be obtained in this lonely place." The elder brother looked to the younger, who said haughtily, "There is a case of medicines here," and brought it in from a closet and put it on the table. I opened some of the bottles, smelt them, and put the stoppers to my lips. If I wanted to use anything save narcotic medicines that were poisons in themselves, I would not have administered any one of those. "Do you doubt them?" asked the younger brother. "You see, monsieur, I am going to use them," I replied, and said no more. I made the patient swallow with great difficulty, and after many efforts, the dose what I desired to give, as I intended to repeat it after a while, and as it was necessary to watch its influence, I then sat down by the side of the bed. There was a timid and suppressed woman in attendance, wife of the man downstairs who had retreated into a corner. The house was damp and decayed, indifferently furnished, evidently recently occupied and temporarily used. Some thick, old hangings had been nailed up before the window, to deaden the sound of the shrieks. They continued to be uttered in the regular succession, with the cry, "My husband, my father, and my brother," the counting up to 12, and hush. That night, the last night of the year, towards 9 o'clock, a man in a black dress rang at my gate, demanded to see me, and softly followed my servant, Ernest Defarge, a youth, upstairs. When my servant came into the room where I sat with my wife, we saw the man who was supposed to be at the gate, standing silent behind him. "An urgent case in the Rue Saint-Honore," he said. It would not detain me. He had a coach in waiting. It brought me to my grave. When I was clear of the house, a black muffler was drawn tightly over my mouth from behind, and my arms were pinioned. The two brothers crossed the road from a dark corner and identified me with a single gesture. The Marquis took from his pocket the letter I had written, showed it to me, burnt it in the light of the lantern that was held, and extinguished the ashes with his foot. Not a word was spoken. I was brought here. I was brought to my living grave. If it had pleased God to put it in the heart of either of the brothers, in all these frightful years, to grant me any tidings of my dearest wife, so much as to let me know by a word whether alive or dead, I might have thought that he had not quite abandoned them. But now I believe that the mark of the Red Cross is fatal to them, and that they have no part in his mercies. And them and their descendants, the last of their race, I, Alexander Manette, unhappy prisoner, do this last night of the year 1767, in my unbearable agony, denounce to the times, when all these things shall be answered for, I denounce them to heaven and to earth.
And to sum it up, he's going to prison or la guillotine.
Dead man. Dead